I just love the music, and I love that I'm helping these bands. It means a lot to me. There's a band, the Gothard Sisters. They started up on the podcast back in 2008 or 9, and they were three young women from Seattle who were playing fiddles. And their first album that they released, it was okay. It was young. The second album was nice. The third album, you're like, wow, this is actually a really good album. The fourth album, you're like, holy crap. The last album they just released was all original music, all original songs and tunes, which is something that I always like to see. And now they're getting to release another one. And it was fantastic. And they have, skyrocketing. And what I love is I love seeing these bands and artists who have been with me for years and are still sharing their music.
That was Marc Gunn, host of the Irish and Celtic Music Podcast. Hello, and welcome to episode 113 of the Irish Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Becker. Gunn is going to be my guest on the show this week. Over the past 4 years, a main focus of our podcast has been highlighting people who are promoting Irish culture in Ireland, the United States, and other places in the world. Whether it's authors writing about Irish Americans in the Civil War, coaches who are teaching the GAA games in the U.S., coaches who are teaching baseball over in Ireland, teachers sharing the Irish language, or a journalist taking a look at a long-since-forgotten Irish-American baseball player, we're always here to give a platform to those who want to share Irish culture. Let's get right to this week's conversation. Marc Gunn, what makes your podcast different from others that play Irish and Celtic music?
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. I started this podcast back in 2005, and there are not many of Celtic music podcasts out there, but mine was not the first. In fact, it was actually the second, first one being a podcast called Celtic Music News, but mine is definitely the longest lasting. I, again, started in July 2005, so it's almost been 20 years. And what makes this show incredible is that it's highlights Celtic bands from around the globe. I love the fact that there are bands, all over the United States here in Atlanta, up in Boston, in New York, in Chicago, the big places that you're going to have stuff, but also in Austin, Texas, or in Seattle, Washington, or in Omaha, Nebraska, and not just in America. You have bands from South America, South Africa, Canada, Germany, France, Spain, Italy. I've had bands from Japan, bands in the Czech Republic. The list goes on and on. Literally, there's music from around the world that's being played, Celtic music that's being played around the world. And I get a chance to highlight and share that music with my audience, which is really just pretty amazing. Again, I always, when I started, I attempted to listen to Thistle and Shamrock, which focused on the music of Ireland and Scotland specifically. The bands were from there. And I feature a lot of bands from Ireland and Scotland. Many of them are some of the favorites on the show. But it goes beyond that. You get music from literally around the globe, Celtic musicians, Celtic people from around the globe who just love the music and culture and want to share it with others. And I get to share their music and journeys with my listeners.
So was it a conscious decision to go out and find Irish and Celtic music from other parts of the world? Or were you focusing on Ireland and Scotland and maybe America, and you just started to find out that there was good Celtic music being played all over the world?
Well, originally I started it because I had a band called the Brobdingnagian Bards, and I actually had a magazine, and we were on mp3.com. And there, it wasn't a matter of place or whatnot. I was sharing some Celtic music that was really cool from around the globe. And like, there's this amazing band of New Zealand, and I shared their music in my newsletter. And then all of a sudden the podcasting started, and I was like, what is this? And I was like, hey, it's a great way to promote my band, and I'll play them in every episode. And now I rarely play them or my own music, because what I found is that people love Celtic music, and we're passionate about our music and our culture. So I found it was a great way to share all of that. So it was sort of an accident. I just kind of stumbled onto it, and the more I shared it, the more people got excited about it and said, "Hey, I found this, and I listened to it here," and just went on and on. There were times that I was doing podcasting early on, and I had people recognize my voice and in Ireland and such, and people were like, "Wow!" And it just really made a difference. I don't, and really because of that early beginning through mp3.com, again with no location, I really just found that there was, as I was finding all this music, that there were so many different types. They were all over the world, and I could, each one stood out as different and unique, and they didn't always sound like the stuff you'd hear from Ireland or Scotland, but it was still largely based on the same idea. I put out actually an album years ago called How America Saved Irish Music, and one of the basic concepts behind the album was that the music of Ireland left Ireland, with the big diaspora around the world, and then people started bringing music back to Ireland, and the music had changed a little bit once it got back to Ireland, and when it got back to Ireland, and it affected the music of Ireland. So now it's not like a lot of times you hear these rock rhythms, and so one of the most popular styles of music these days, Celtic rock. When it comes to the Celtic music, it's all integrated, and it's beautiful diversity and integration. It's just a magical thing, and obviously I'm passionate about it. So yeah, I love it.
Here at the Irish Baseball Podcast, we're a production of the Irish American Baseball Society, and in addition to all the work we do with baseball, we've had free Irish language classes for our members, and we find that we're trying to promote Irish culture as much as we are trying to talk about the baseball. And I think a lot of preserving the culture is just giving outlets to people who are trying to do that on their own and trying to, in your case, create this Irish and Celtic music. But as you said, an interesting thing about being Irish is the culture sort of follows you wherever you go around the globe. So do you find that when you're checking out some of these Celtic artists in different countries, especially if you're not even talking about the US, Ireland, or Scotland, you're talking, New Zealand or the Czech Republic or wherever you're talking, that they're not only incorporating the Celtic music, but they are finding what is great in their countries where they're living now and incorporating that into the music.
Definitely. There's a great band out of the Czech Republic, speaking of which, Pochin, and they I think the bar player is Irish. Actually, no, I don't think he's Irish. I think he's from out of England. I think I forget right now, but he's Celtic heritage. He loves the music. He starts a band up in the Czech Republic. Most of the band members are Czech. Well, and admittedly, the Czech Republic is basically about the location where the Celtic language began. So it's actually kind of makes sense, especially there. But yeah, they're incorporating some Czech music as well into their styles. They also have a bunch of Breton music, another one of the Celtic nations over in Brittany, and they're fusing things together, which is one of the things that's great. A lot of times when I think of like American Celtic music, you find a lot at Renaissance festivals, and the music, if you listen to it, comparing it to Celtic music coming out of Ireland, it is very different. There's stylistically, it's very American. It's very more Bob Dylan and rock music that American rock than it is what you might hear in Ireland, but it's distinctly Irish at the same time, and they preserve the culture. They share the culture with other Irish music lovers, and it's a beautiful thing because you find the cultures influence each other, and they grow and they learn from each other, and that's one of the things that I find so fascinating to do this. I was actually a cultural geographer in college, and so it turned out I'm actually using my degree, but with music and culture and seeing those fusions and seeing how the music comes alive with folk. So yeah, definitely.
It's interesting that you would mention Bob Dylan there because last year I did an interview with someone from the Bob Dylan Museum and Archives in
Oh, nice.
Tulsa because they had an exhibit on Shane MacGowan from the Pogues.
Oh, nice.
And it is interesting that you would mention that because it sort of does come full circle when you see somebody like Bob Dylan who had definitely was influenced at least
Oh,
or
majorly.
definitely enjoyed the music of Shane MacGowan,
Yeah.
and then it does kind of come full circle when you're talking about how a lot of the American Irish or Celtic music sounds a lot like Bob Dylan.
Yeah. Well, that's the funny thing. Actually, interestingly, Bob Dylan ripped off a song by Brendan Behan, Patriot Game, and he did his own version back in the late '60s. And I'm guessing, I'm assuming he didn't know that it was actually by Brendan Behan, but he took the same melody and the same story idea and rewrote a song. His own version of Patriot Game, but yes, the musical style, it you can see that progression and how they learn from each other. Bob Dylan is a great example too, because I know he spent a lot of time in England at the very least. I don't know how much he made it into Ireland, but there's the folk revival was going strong, and he was learning from all the people there. In they were there as sharing the culture and sharing the music as well. And obviously, Shane MacGowan is what a powerhouse of Irish culture and influence, and how it's affected the modern day Celtic music. I mean, where would the Dropkick Murphys be if it wasn't for Shane MacGowan? I mean, so yeah, it's pretty impressive.
Actually, it's funny that you should mention that because when I was doing some research for that interview, I did see that Dylan did spend a lot of time in Ireland and he
Oh, did
does
he?
have a lot of respect for
Mm,
different Irish and Celtic music. And he has definitely let that influence him, at least
yeah,
in the maybe the second, well, I don't want to say second half. His career has been going on for quite some
yeah.
time now.
Second,
But he
third,
did
fourth,
spend a
fifth.
lot of time in Ireland and with the music.
Nice.
When you talk about bands like the Dropkick Murphys that you
Yeah.
just mentioned, and we talk about the Pogues, how much do you get into the rock, or do you maybe keep it more towards that, what we would consider traditional Irish and Celtic music?
So when early on, because my band, the Brobdingnagian Bards, we are very different musically. I play an auto harp, and my partner plays the recorder and mandolin, instruments that work fairly well for Renaissance festivals where we got our start. But we were even there. We were like kind of fringe. We got started playing Celtic music, and Irish drinking songs and such. And even there, my musically, it sounded different. So one of the my first goals when I was trying to, I guess you could call myself an apologist for it, but I was trying to figure out a way to fit into this. And one of the things I decided to do was, when I was setting up the format for my show, was I don't define what you consider Celtic music is. That's not my job. Now, if I don't like it, I'm not going to play it. But if you play music more closely related to Enya, and you call yourself, say you play Celtic music, I'm all for it. You call that. Again, not my preferred musical style these days, so usually I'm less likely to play it. The music that I am playing is whatever people will submit. So I get music from around the globe, around stylistically around the globe too. So a lot of times you'll get, I get, I think I get a lot. Recently, I've gotten a lot of traditional tunes and such, and that's been growing a lot over the past 2 or 3 years. But over the course of the podcast, it has varied all over. Again, I love contemporary Celtic music in particular, and when I say that, I'm talking about basically taking the traditional sounds and then contemporizing them. So one thing comes to mind is Lindsey Sterling, who fuses a little bit of Irish fiddle into dance music, electronic dance music. Or I'm not saying I again, one of my challenges with the podcast is I can only play the music that I get permission to play. So the bands have to submit music. For instance, I've never had the Dropkick Murphys on the show yet. Knock on wood. Lindsey Sterling, same thing. But there are bands that have taken, that are doing electronic bagpipes. There's bands, Jiggy, or Jiggy is an Irish band that I have played on the podcast, and they do again dance music with fiery fiddle whistles, and it's just amazing stuff. And then I've had the flogging Molly on there. I've had lots of smaller bands like the Muckers. I have some songwriters like Ashley Davis, who is writing new songs for a new age, even more so than other Celtic bands. Everyone has like a song or two, but not as many are active songwriters and how they got their start. So yeah, my big thing is trying to find a way to get people to share whatever their music is. So if it's Celtic rock, I'm happy to play it. Again, how much will I play? Celtic rock, I'm more likely to play. Celtic New Age, less so. But I'll play as much as I get. Once upon a time, like the last half of the show, usually I have a progression. So I start off with a traditional song, a traditional tune, song, tune, song, tune, song. And when I say that, I guess I should point out that in the Irish tradition, a tune is an instrumental piece, a song is a vocal piece. So I flip those back and forth. And then by the end of the show, I would have Celtic rock. And that's still, I aim for that, for the more contemporary Celtic music, and usually in the last half of the show. But yeah, I keep it, whatever I can get, I will happily share.
So this might be a little inside baseball because I know the world of podcasting pretty well. And is it ever difficult trying to navigate getting the rights to the music? And first of all, it's probably not difficult getting the rights to play the music. But for example, we have here our boss, the founder of the Irish American Baseball Society. He did a movie called The Emerald Diamond, and he owns the music on the soundtrack for that movie.
Right.
But we still will get flagged from YouTube, even though he owns the copyright for it. Yeah. Do you find that sometimes it is really difficult to navigate a lot of those different things as you try to bring this music to people, even if you have the okay from the artist?
So, yes, there are definitely challenges. I've consulted with a couple lawyers, and the podcasting is a gray area in general. But yes, you're likely to get flagged by YouTube, nevertheless. But it's a gray area because, how do you, first off, the question is, how do you pay royalties if you're going to pay royalties? Now, early on, when I started the podcast, I originally didn't pay any royalties, and technically speaking, I still don't exactly. What I do is I get permission and I say, hey, I will promote your music, and I will talk you up and send them to your webpage, encourage people. I've educated my audience that it's important to support the artists. That is like super important. So that's one of my top things. But the reason I don't necessarily pay royalties is because the standard royalty rate for for an album is that if every song that's downloaded is like 10.1 cents per download. And so if you get 5,000 downloads, you basically bankrupted the podcast. I can't run it for that purpose. There's a part of me that wishes I'd started the show at 30 minutes instead of an hour. Maybe I could afford to do that. So instead, what I usually end up doing, which is buy the music from the artists when they release the music, which, if they're paying like the streaming royalty rate, which is like half a cent, well then all of a sudden I'm doing well. But which one is it for podcasting? Well, it's kind of uncertain, legally speaking. So that's one of the reasons why, number one, as I try to get permission from every artist that's played on the podcast, let them know that I can't pay. Number two is I do have to pay attention to if the music is a cover song or not, because that is also something you have to pay royalties for. And that's what I can't do. I can't play. I can't play the cover songs without permission from the person who wrote the song. So many of the songs that are found in the Irish tradition are that you think that are traditional folk songs. They're not. They're cover songs. Fiddler's Green was written by John Connolly. There's several songs that were written by Irishmen back in the 60s, and they're The Town I Once Loved. I've never played that on the podcast because I can't do it. But that means I have to be really attentive and pay attention to what songs are were written by public figures and which ones weren't. And that is a challenge. I'll tell you that right now.
Well, I'm glad that you're putting this much effort into it because, like I said, I do find that it is important for everybody to make sure they're sharing their cultural backgrounds. And it's not just Irish people, it's not just Celtic people. I do think that this is something that, when you do combine different types of music, if you look at definitely in the Celtic tradition, that led to a lot of country music in Appalachia. And then that led into the rock and roll tradition when you combine it with black music. So it is important to make sure that we're preserving these types of music. But it is also interesting, like you said, and something that came up in that last question is, like you said, a lot of the Irish music is newer than people would think.
Yeah.
And do you try to let people know that? Do you try to share how relatively recent some of these things that we think of as being very traditional, how recent they are?
I don't know that I do that specifically. That's I think I leave a lot of that kind of open for the people who are listening. There are times when I will specifically, point out again Ashley Davis, or I'll point out, this is an original song by someone. But there's a lot of times when I just don't even touch it really. I just leave it entirely up to them to figure that out. But I might do my best also to avoid the copyrighted stuff, which it happens frequently where I find a song that I'm like, oh, that's a cover song. Oops. But I do spend some time with each episode trying to make sure I don't do that.
And these podcasts, they're a labor of love, and you put in a lot of effort to do them. Like you said, doing all the research into the music, finding new artists. What keeps you coming back time after time, wanting to put in the work? Initially you were doing this partially to promote your own music. Well, what kept you coming back even after it was about promoting your own music?
It's funny, when I got on Patreon, it turned into a very financially viable reason to run the show. But that was, 10 years after I had already been doing this regularly. And so really it boils down to I just love the music, and I love that I'm helping these bands. It means a lot to me when I meet these bands. There's a band, the Gothard Sisters. They started up on the podcast back in 2008 or 9. And they were 3 young women from Seattle who were playing fiddles. And their first album that they released, it was okay. It was young. The second album was nice. The third album, you're like, wow, this is actually a really good album. The fourth album, you're like, holy crap. And the last album they just released was all original music, all original songs and tunes. It was completely original. So, which is something that I always like to see. And now they're getting to release another one, and it was fantastic. And they have, skyrocketing. And what I love is I love seeing these bands and artists who have been with me for years and are still sharing their music. Poaching is another one. Jesse Ferguson, the Stout Pounders. All these fantastic bands that got started years ago, and they're still at it, and they're still saying, "Hey, I got some new music for you to share," and I get to share that. And really, what it boils down to is I love helping bands. I love helping people out. It makes me feel good. Honestly, it's like I know, I love my music, and I feel like I'm writing some good stuff, but if I have any legacy, it's going to be the podcast, because it's affected hundreds of thousands of people around the globe. People who have had a chance to listen to the music. And what I tell people a lot of times, I'm like, go ahead and listen to the music, but find the bands that you love out of this. And I don't expect them to stick around. Many of them have, but I don't expect them necessarily to be listening to my podcast tomorrow. My goal is to introduce them to some new bands and maybe help those bands get some new fans. And that's it's been wonderful seeing that happen.
Marc Gunn, host of the Irish and Celtic Music Podcast, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Rick. I appreciate it.
I'm Rick Becker, and that was Marc Gunn, host of the Irish and Celtic Music Podcast. As you may have noticed, this was a longer episode than in the past. We're going to be adjusting the format to the show to keep things fresh. I hope you liked this new, longer format. This has been episode 113 of the Irish Baseball Podcast.